Namaskar and thank you for tuning in to the Economic Brief, your weekly window to key business and economy related stories from an Indian perspective of the world. On the program, India remains a rising economic haven amid global challenges. We'll highlight who's saying what. The OECD downgrades its global growth forecasts due to weaker projections for the US and Eurozone. US hits Houthi targets. The Red Sea trade routes are facing increased uncertainty. Germany approves $545 billion it's an economic boost. They also loosen debt rules for defense and climate projects. Before we move on, let's listen to India's External Affairs Minister, Jaishankar. He's speaking about India's foreign policy and resilient supply chains.
Clearly, there is a need to de-risk the global economy from the dangers of over-concentration in any single geography. But we also need to build reliable and resilient supply chains. At the same time, because we have now moved decisively, irrevocably into the digital era, we need to ensure trust and transparency when it comes to selection of partners.
And it is the selection of those partners that, to some extent, which is what is keeping India as a rising haven amid, the global challenges. Let's look at some indicators that are coming up behind me. We see already that retail inflation has eased to about 3.61% in February of 2025. We know that the RBI has cut the policy rates to 6.25%, and it's likely now in the next meeting in April that that's going to ease further. India is to become the third largest economy by 2028. This is Morgan Stanley. Now, Morgan Stanley has talked a lot about the Indian economy. It's projected several scenarios. There was a bearish scenario also, which is saying that the Indian economy would be $6.6 trillion. And then the bullish scenario is that India would be $10.3 trillion by 2035. So that is a pretty big jump, 3 times what the Indian economy size is currently. And the GDP per capita, according to Morgan Stanley, currently at about $2,514, will rise to about $6,706. That's the bullish viewpoint by the year 2035. Moody's also has been bullish about India. It's talked about India surpassing that 6.5% target for GDP this year. Now, Blackstone, we're talking here, this is Moody's saying 4.7 trillion by 2028. Let's look at Blackstone had already talked about some serious investments in India. They're talking about doubling their investments to from 50 to, yes, in fact, we're going to see Blackstone doubling their investments in India from $50 billion to $100 billion. Now, Blackstone has been looking at a number of issues. They're first highlighting stability. They are talking about political stability as well, a strong political leadership, and then they are talking about reduced regulations in the economy. They're also saying that there's a youthful and dynamic population, and there's a technological focus. These are the key drivers why they are investing so much in the Indian economy and looking with that kind of an outlook for the future. And let's look at, what Nandan Nilekani, you know who Nandan Nilekani is? He, of course, has played a significant role in India's digital ecosystem and, of course, was a founder member of Infosys, the former managing director of Infosys, the head of India's Aadhaar program. And he says that the number of startups are growing, by about 20% every year. And Nilekani has, the reasons for this is, it's pretty obvious for everyone. We can see that there's a startup ecosystem which is prioritizing a lot of issues, innovation, profitability. There's a regulatory environment that is allowing for these startups to come into the country and is driven by reforms for investors, like, angel tax removal. There's the long-term capital gains which have been lowered. And also, there are simplified regulations for venture capital funding from abroad. So all this is boosting the investor confidence in startups. So clearly, India, he says, is going to be, the most preferred IPO market by around 2035. Currently, it's the second most, but it's going to be clearly the most preferred IPO market by 2035. India is clearly on a promising path. We can see that amid all the global challenges. And the key part is that India has what's called a digital public infrastructure. It's playing a key role. And before we move on, let's listen to what the Foreign Secretary of India, Vikram Misri, had to say about India's digital public infrastructure, how it's helping India in the global environment.
Every month, 16 billion transactions happen through UPI. More than half the electronic payment transactions across the world happen in India alone. The social outcomes that have been unleashed by this digital transformation are even more profound. We saw the benefits of digital public infrastructure in full flow, especially during COVID. Nearly $9.3 billion were deposited in the accounts of 420 million beneficiaries using the direct benefits transfer system. Taken together, Jan Dhan, Aadhaar and mobile are known in India as the JAM Trinity. This represents the world's largest financial inclusion program. 19 countries have entered into agreements and understandings with India on the India stack.
Padmanabhan, a senior journalist with over 36 years of experience covering business and economy-related news, is joining us. We are privileged to have him with us. Mr. Padmanabhan, now we see that Morgan Stanley has three scenarios for India's growth. A bearish one which says that our economy would be about 6.6 trillion by 2035. Then I have a base one which says that India would be about $8.8 trillion. And then the bullish one which is about $10.3 trillion by 2035. So what do you think we need to do to stay on the bullish path?
Mark, there are a lot of things that India needs to do. But before that, I think we should put on record what India has done so far.
True.
I think it has done, you mentioned digital public infrastructure. And as you know, this was leveraged to target poverty in an incredible manner. Today, India has almost for less than 5% of abject poverty. But the upside of that is it has created a neo-middle class. And this neo-middle class is still very vulnerable. And you did list in your opening the concerns that are mounting globally with the OECD scaling down its growth projections. So given this backdrop, we have done a lot, but there's a lot more to be done. Okay. And here you did mention Nandan Nilekani, and he did give a recent talk just about a week ago, where he talked of the four unlocks. He basically said India has to unlock technology, capital, entrepreneurship, and formalization. See, the formalization is already on a trajectory thanks to DPI, digital public infrastructure, and so on. But technology, capital, and entrepreneurship, particularly entrepreneurship, depends on ease of doing business. And that to India is the primary challenge at this point. So the finance minister in a recent interview said that GST is definitely a reform is on the agenda and is imminent. I think that should set the tone, and that is what India has to pursue. It has to reform internally, particularly now when we are facing such massive global headwinds.
Indeed, but Blackstone seems pretty much they see good for the medium to the long term for our country, and they're doubling their investments. Will this crowd in similar investment locally, you think?
Mark, that's a hope because you see, Indian entrepreneurship has been struggling, India Inc., since 2008. It's not new. But we have seen a big movement in the startup sector, but that's not, in terms of economic value, they're not so significant at this point of time, but we'll get at a later stage. The medium and small enterprise is where action should really kick in. And that's not, very headline-oriented investment, but they create jobs, they contribute to GDP, but they struggle on what I mentioned on the ease of doing business, cost of capital. Their access to capital is very limited. So these are the things which are binding them. And none of this can work unless we have reforms, particularly at the state level. You need at
Indeed.
the union government, but at the state level too.
So, Mr. Padmanabhan, startups are energetic. We can see that. And Nilekani sees that India is going to be the preferred IPO market moving forward. You were saying that there is a problem entrepreneurially, but there is, at least in terms of the startup ecosystem, they seem to be eager. So, what's driving them?
No doubt, Mark. And what's driving them is exactly, you see, they have most of them operate in an area which does not intersect too much with regulation and
Okay.
policy, but even at the state level. So it gives them the freedom to operate, and their access to VC capital and all kinds of angel investors gives them a supply route for capital too. So they get the benefits of modern business, but their scale is not like economically, they're very important. Absolutely. But I'm saying in terms of scale, like
Yeah,
what organized industry would contribute vis-a-vis startups is not there. But startups are very, very important, and they will catalyze entrepreneurship. And it's very heartening to see the scale and level of entrepreneurs. Some of them are as young as 21, 22 years, and
indeed.
who actually own unicorns in this country.
Indeed. Anil Padmanabhan, do stay with us for our next story as well. And this is about the OECD having downgraded its growth forecast because of weaker projections for the United States and Eurozone. So US growth is now expected to decline to 2.2% in 2025. In fact, from 2.2%, I beg your pardon, to 1.6% in 2026. And while Eurozone growth is forecast, in fact, to drop to 1% in 2025 before gradually improving to 1.2% in 2026. Here's our report. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development has cut its 2025 global growth forecast to 3.1%, citing weak growth, inflation, and geopolitical tensions.
In early 2025, high-frequency activity indicators point to some softening of global growth prospects. Surveys suggest lower business and consumer confidence in several strong-performing economies such as Brazil, Canada, and the United States.
Rising tariffs could hinder global business investment, drive inflation, and force central banks to maintain higher interest rates longer, according to the OECD. German car maker BMW expects tariffs to cost it 1 billion euros this year.
Last year, we achieved an export value of over 10 billion US dollars. This once again makes the BMW Group the largest automotive exporter in the United States by value. We benefit from an integrated global economy, and that is why we continue to advocate for open markets and free trade.
The Paris-based OECD projects weaker growth in the US at 2.2% in 2025, down from 2.4% in December. The US is expected to grow at 1.6% in 2026. That's 0.5% lower than prior forecasts. The Eurozone is expected to fall to 1.0% from 1.3% forecast earlier for 2025, but is likely to rise from 0.7% in 2024 to 1.2% in 2026. OECD warns escalating trade wars could worsen the global outlook, as tariff costs would outweigh benefits and fail to fund planned tax cuts.
Another risk is that inflationary pressures resurge, and that as a result, monetary policy will need to remain more restrictive than expected.
The OECD report warns of global growth risks and trade restrictions, market volatility, policy shifts, and inflation deviations, worsened by high debt and asset bubbles. It points to fiscal discipline being crucial to sustaining debt, enabling governments to address future shocks, and meeting current and future spending demands. The Economic Brief, DD India. Mr. Anil Padmanabhan is still with us. Mr. Padmanabhan, has the OECD gauged the pulse of the global economy correctly?
Undoubtedly, in my view, yes. You just need to look at proxy measures. Look at gold. Gold prices have topped $3,000. I just checked the price in interval, and it's now at $3,040 per troy ounce. 4 years ago, it was at about $1,500. So it has more than doubled in the last 4 years. And particularly in the last week, it has gained by as much as $100. So, which is basically telling you that the world is jittery. Gold is considered a safe haven. And you also are aware that central banks world over, including the Reserve Bank of India, have been buying up gold. Basically, everybody is shoring up for a difficult winter that lies ahead.
Yeah, and apart from gold, are there opportunities for India here because of the concerns? We did speak in our first story about how, India is standing strong amid the global challenges. So do you see opportunities here?
Absolutely, Mark. And see, the good thing is that every cloud has a silver lining. Now, the greatest thing about India is, I wish we would do it regularly, but India does extremely well in crisis. It deals with the crisis well and recovers from the crisis well. We will look at the biggest crisis this country faced in 1991 and the recovery that followed, the reforms that followed, and then most recently the COVID-19 pandemic, and then the subsequent three shocks that we had: the Russia Ukraine conflict, the US Fed increasing interest rates, the West Asia conflict. All these shocks sent commodity prices skyrocketing, but India did well. It held its nerve, and it carried out reforms, and you saw the rebound in growth. So, in a crisis, India performs very well. So, I am not particularly worried about a global crisis as far as the Indian economy goes at this point of time.
Also, Mr. Padmanabhan, the report is advising fiscal discipline, but we see Doge in the United States is trying to do that, bring in some austerity. In Germany, they have increased their debt limit because they need to spend to push the economy forward. So what's the right balance, you would think?
Mark, ideally, fiscal balance is the best weapon you can, macroeconomic weapon in your arsenal. So because if you don't have fiscal balance, basically the government spends far more than what it earns, then the surplus money becomes potentially inflationary in the economy. And once inflation grows or surges, as we have seen in the last 3 years, it has major, serious consequences across the board. And the worst off, obviously, are those at the bottom of the pyramid. So, yes, fiscal balance is absolutely necessary, but the United States has abandoned fiscal rectitude since the last 4 decades. And it is Germany is reacting to a more geo-strategic situation because the Americans are threatening NATO and telling them to stand on their own feet. So they are basically ramping up their own defense spending because they know the circumstance is very inclement. So the German situation is different, but the Americans have been overspending for decades.
Right.
Yes, Dodge is a very good move to correct it, but I don't think it's a magic bullet that will solve the fiscal largesse of decades. It will take a long time to unwind, and it will have global consequences, which we are already seeing at this point of time.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Mr. Anil Padmanabhan. Thank you for joining us and putting all this into perspective for us. Moving on to our next story then, conflict with the Houthis. It heavily impacts the Red Sea. Egypt's President al-Sisi, he's reported that $800 million are being lost on the Suez Canal every month. And JP Morgan has also noted that 30% of global container trade actually passes through the Suez Canal. Now, regional shipments have dropped by 75% because vessels are avoiding that route. Anu Kaushik explains.
This is a neighborhood in Yemen's capital, Sana'a, after a US strike. The strike is part of a larger US operation against the country's Iran backed Houthi rebels who have been attacking commercial ships in the Red Sea, disrupting global trade. US President Donald Trump has vowed to destroy the group. He also warned Iran of consequences if Houthi attacks continue.
Our message to Iran is you better take this president seriously, and I think the Houthis learned that the hard way this past weekend. As I said in my opening remarks, there's a new sheriff in town, and this president is not just going to sit on his hands and allow terrorists to launch attacks on commercial vessels and U.S. naval ships.
Hamas's ally Houthis began Red Sea attacks from Yemeni ports days after the group attacked Israel on October 7, 2023. The strikes have majorly impacted the global supply chain. Houthis claim that they are attacking Israeli vessels. Red Sea is a major shipping route. The Suez Canal in Egypt is a key trade route between Europe and Asia, connecting the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea. Egypt has said that monthly losses of the canal revenues reached around $800 million due to the attacks. According to JP Morgan, 30% of global container trade passes through the canal. But estimates suggest that container shipments in the region have declined by 75% as vessels avoid the route. Firms are now rerouting vessels around Africa via the Cape route. This has made the journey nearly 10 to 14 days longer, resulting in higher fuel costs and logistical complications. Companies are also paying extra for insurance due to increased risk of attacks. In 2024, Israel's only Red Sea port declared bankruptcy due to a fall in commercial activity amid the attacks. The Houthis have vowed to retaliate, saying that they are at war with the US, keeping West Asia on the edge. Eventually, the consumers will suffer as companies would increase the price of finished products to make up for the increased cost of shipping. Anu Kaushik's report for the Economic Brief, DD India.
Well, Germany's parliament has approved a massive surge in borrowing to boost the economy and strengthen European defense. The package includes a $545 billion fund for infrastructure and climate projects, and it also loosens debt rules for more defense spending. But the question is, how will this approval impact Germany's economic growth and defense capabilities? Diptanshu Kashyap brings us more in this report, and we leave you with his report. Thank you very much for watching. Namaskar.
German lawmakers have passed a landmark spending package, signaling a historic shift in the country's fiscal policy. Spearheaded by Chancellor-in-Waiting Friedrich Merz, the legislation unlocks hundreds of billions of euros for defense and infrastructure, marking the end of decades of budget austerity. The plan cleared the lower house with overwhelming support, surpassing the two-thirds majority needed. With growing threats from Russia, the government highlighted defense spending as a critical priority.
Russia is by far the greatest threat to European security. Putin continues to act with undiminished severity against Ukraine and its civilian population, even after the offers for ceasefire negotiations and others.
France's President Emmanuel Macron praised the decision as excellent news for Europe. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen echoed similar sentiments, underscoring that the vote sends a strong message about Germany's unwavering commitment to strengthening European defense. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz also hailed the move.
With three amendments to the basic law, we are removing the shackles that have so far prevented us from spending sufficient funds on our defense. These decisions are important, they are correct, and they are appropriate.
The approval follows rising concern across Europe over Russia's aggressive actions and the changing dynamics of US support for NATO. European NATO members agreed to spend 2% of their GDP on defense by 2024, yet only the US, UK, and Greece were meeting this target. Last year, Germany boosted its defense spending by 23.2%, contributing to an 11.7% increase in overall European defense spending.
The decision we are taking today on defense readiness in a comprehensive sense of our country can therefore be nothing less than the first major step towards a new European defense community.
Though the legislation heavily focuses on defense, it also allocates substantial investments in infrastructure and climate initiatives. Critics argue that these ambitious plans must be paired with structural reforms to ensure long-term economic stability. The surge in defense spending is expected to play a pivotal role in shaping Europe's defense future as well as its continued support for Ukraine. Diptanshu Kashyap's report for the Economic Brief, DD India.